everyone, what's going on? It's been a hot minute since I last picked up the camera. In fact, it's been around about 24 hours. I'm going to be explaining what this is behind me in the rest of this video. Okie dokie. Yesterday I raced the Bourne Cycle Classic, which was in Bourne. It was around about a 3.5 hour drive to get there. Nothing major, but the race was hard. It was fast, it was windy, and the roads were just really, really grippy. You know, like the type of roads where, yes, you're going up and down, but you never have like any real respite at all. And we, like, for the majority of the race, I have to say, like, from my own personal point of view, I spent a lot of the time like in the gutter or like just closing gaps and so on and so forth. Like it was a pretty tough race for myself, and it led me to think, like, because the war of attrition that happened during the race, which happens in many races, like, but this race in particular was a lot like, I guess, your Paris-Roubaix, your one-day classics, things like that. It was like the guy who won solo. It was an awesome ride. One solo, and then, you know, there was a gap to the next group, and there was a few, you know, 5 or 6 people. There's another gap, and then there's like another 5. You know, it was that type of finish. So very hard man's race. Very few finishers, and just catastrophic damage in the bunch everywhere. So what I was interested by, because obviously I look at my racing stats after every race, because that's how you learn, like, your strengths and weaknesses and all that sort of stuff. So I looked at my race yesterday, and because I went into it with a lot of freshness, like I did that big week of training the week before, and then last week I just kind of, you know, parked it up and rested quite a bit. So I was very fresh coming into it. I didn't even ride the day before. In fact, I hadn't ridden for nearly 2 days, if you take into account, if you actually calculate hours. So the way the race panned out, like, I was almost constantly playing catch up all day. There was little groups going, and I was having to accelerate after them, and then, like, I wouldn't get across, and then I'd have to try and get across again. So there was an awful lot of surging and restarting and coming back and that sort of thing. So I found myself in a small chase group behind the front group at one point, and we were like swapping turns, and maybe there was like a group of us of like 10-15. I was on the front, and there was a few of us doing some turns, and I think I spent like maybe 2 hours at nearly 300 watts average, and about 330 normalized, something like that. And it just turned into a hard day. We weren't going through an off for 2 hours, certainly, but we spent a lot of time chasing to get back, and then it all kicked off again. So it was never really any respite. So what I did was I actually took some stats from Damien Clayton, the guy who won, from SwiftCarbon Pro Cycling, and my stats as well. And not taking, you know, I'm only choosing Damien because he won, but there's plenty of riders in that top 10 who are, you know, similar kind of strength and build to Damien. You know, obviously on the slightly heavier side than myself, but you know, you can't take anything away from a guy who's obviously very strong. So what I thought I'd do is take the numbers and show what difference it makes when, you know, a light guy like myself is racing on a flat race, or an exposed race, or, you know, a race that doesn't have any major climbs on it. So this is what happens when, you know, you're kind of too light, and there is like a cut-off point, I think. Like you can be maybe 65 kilos and get around plenty of races in really good shape. So there's like a sweet spot. Now, this is why I don't necessarily stay at this weight all year round. Excuse me. And it's not like I don't advocate being, you know, as light as you can be, because it won't always help you. I can't stress that enough. So this is what I put together, which is like basically Damien and myself. And Damien, don't take this as, you know, I've not done this deliberately. I'm not trying to be an idiot here, but I'm assuming these numbers. Okay, I have no knowledge. I don't know Damien, but I'm assuming these numbers just to keep it as kind of level as possible when we're making the comparison. So what I've done is I've just put my weight there, 60 kilos, which it isn't actually, it's 59. But for the sake of the whole thing, I'm leaving it at 60. So 60, I averaged 280 watts for the whole race. Well, I say for the whole race, I didn't finish. 3 hours and 15 minutes, and the whole race was 4 hours. So I averaged 280 watts. Damien, we're guessing, is 75 kilos. Maybe less, I don't know, but for the sake of it, I'm just saying 75. And that's the general weight that a lot of people, like 70, 75 is a general weight for a lot of people. 310 watts was his average, according to Strava. And this then is where it gets kind of like mathematical, which I'm not very good at. So we got a 6 watts per kilo FTP for both of us, for argument's sake. So mine is 360, and then his is 450 for his weight, obviously. So working on that, we can say that his watts per kilo for the race, his average watts per kilo was 4.1, and mine was 4.6. You can already tell from that I was potentially working harder. Interestingly though, then you look at my FTP and the percentage of my FTP, and that's 78%. So I was working at 78% of my FTP. So you can see that there's only 80 watts. And for him, 69% of FTP he was riding at for the race. It potentially means that he was working at a lot lower capacity than I was working at. There's obviously a lot of factors influencing this, like the fact that I was caught out a number of times and then I was having to chase, and I was in a select group and I was doing through and off, which would have raised my power, which I said for almost an hour and a half, 2 hour period, I'd averaged 300 watts, which is 5 watts per kilo for myself. That's not taken into consideration the normalized, which might well have been around the 5.5 watts per kilo. So these things you've got to take in consideration. He might have well have ridden a very, very smart race. He probably did, hence why he won. But, you know, it saved a lot of pennies, a lot of matches, and that's kind of what we've come down to on here as well. So saving matches is obviously your biggest deal. You always hear it being talked about. But what I've done is a very, very basic graph of energy expenditure during the race. So we have FTP here, and then we have like time at the bottom. And the red dotted line is going to be someone with an FTP of 450 or, you know, 400 watts or whatever. And then my FTP, the blue dotted line. And what you can see here is as we go through the race, and obviously there's very few spikes here, but as you can imagine, when you're in a race, your power spikes are a lot more frequent. You can tell that every time it goes high intensity and we go over the blue, that means I've burned a match. Now it depends how long you spend going over that blue line, depends how many matches you burn in that one go or in that one effort. So I made a big effort halfway through the race yesterday where I made a move over the top of like a small climb, and I was away solo for around about 10 minutes. And in that time I was riding at around about 380 to 400 watts. So that is 110% of FTP almost. And what is happening there basically is I am burning through matches every minute, basically. And that's not great, but sometimes it's an effort you have to make. There's me burning a match. There we are both burning a match. There we are both going over our threshold lines, and then we've got a short period of recovery, and then we go back again. I'm burning a match. We're both burning a match, both of us, just me, both, just me, both. So you can see how during the race of this kind of race, so a flat race, I will end up having to go over my threshold a lot more than a heavier guy would. So this is where it wouldn't help you, obviously. I think that's pretty much common sense. But having said that, I still got a very good workout in yesterday, and that was the idea. So I think I still accumulated like 240 TSS in like 3 hours 10, which is huge, quite frankly. And it was played no small part by me doing a lot of through off halfway through the race, doing a couple of efforts, one in particular for 10 minutes plus, where I went way over threshold to try and get across to the next group, by which time the race was in small groups anyway. And then there was a couple of times, well, in fact there was quite a few times where I was riding for possibly a minute, maybe even 2 minutes at 450 watts. So then you start burning through a ton of matches. Now, if I was doing, say, 450 watts for 2 minutes in a slight downhill cross tailwind, a slightly heavier guy, if he was riding 450 watts because, well, he's not having to push as hard because he's slightly heavier, and he has that momentum, something else that you have to factor in as well. Like, once he's up to speed, that momentum's going to help him with that extra weight. Now, if he's riding at 450 watts as well, he's riding at threshold. So there's no problem for him. He can do threshold for an hour. So, whereas for me, how long can I do 450 watts? Well, like 5 minutes. So it's like it's actually like quite interesting when you like break it down. Like, until I wrote all this down on a whiteboard, like, I was pretty blown away by how big the difference was between 4.0 and 4.6. Now, not to complicate it too much and not to like make this video too long, which it probably is already, I'm sorry, but if we were to like roll reverse and if we were to do a hilly race and you were to keep my numbers exactly the same over here, but we were to bump this rider from 310 watts to 380 watts, 390 watts, is now riding 80 watts below his threshold, which would be the same as me. The only difference is he would now be riding at like 5 watts per kilo. Now, 5 watts per kilo for him would be something like 0.8 to 0.9, so it'd be like 80 to 90% of his FTP. So he's now working more than me. He's now working harder than me. So it's interesting how when you flip the roles or when you go on a different course, and this is why the horses for courses thing is very important to remember when you're watching any bike race, really, and when you're trying to predict the winner, or when you're trying to, if you're in the race and you're trying to suss out, who's in the group with you, like how many of you are in the break, who's the one to watch, that sort of thing. So it's very interesting. It's very, very interesting. So, yeah. Give this video a thumbs up if you found that any of use to you whatsoever. If not, don't worry. It's pretty incredible, actually. 69% and 78%. 10%. Almost, give or take.